Chapter 12. At that season Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the grain fields, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck ears and to eat. But the Pharisees, when they saw it, said unto him, Behold, thy disciples do that which it is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath.
So Jesus is walking through the grain fields on the Sabbath day, which was Saturday, and he was hungry. And I think Jesus always knows everything that's going on, and he deliberately knew that he was going to have this confrontation. So he took this opportunity to teach the Pharisees about legalism.
But he said unto them, Have ye not read what David did when he was hungry, and they that were with him, how he...
So the Pharisees, by the strict legalistic law-keeping perspective, would say that you couldn't do work on a Saturday or on a Sabbath day. And they would say simply by plucking the heads of grain off of wheat and putting it in your mouth, somehow they would consider that harvesting a field. It's completely ridiculous. I don't think they fasted on Sabbath days. So whenever they put anything in their mouth, they could call that work too. But they wanted to accuse Jesus and his disciples of harvesting a grain field simply by plucking a few heads of grain and eating it. And Jesus is going to make the point that they don't understand what they're talking about.
He entered into the house of God and ate the showbread, which it was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them that were with him, but only for the priests.
So David, when he and his men were hungry, ate the showbread from the temple, which was for the priest. Again, would be a legalistic violation of the law. But Jesus always says, even in the Old Testament and the New Testament, for all time, mercy and compassion takes priority over legalism and law-keeping. He's not satisfied and he does not desire legalistic law-keeping obedience in search of justification. It is not pleasing to God to have that attitude. It is pleasing to God to have a compassionate, kind, loving demeanor towards all people.
Or have ye not read in the law that on the Sabbath day the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless?
So again, the priests were obligated to perform many duties on the Sabbath day in preparing sacrifices, burnt incense and killing of animals and preparing of animals. All these things required work. So in that sense, you may say the law contradicted itself. It says you cannot work on the Sabbath day, but yet it required the priest to perform work on the Sabbath day. So Jesus, I think, is making the point that it's not about legalism and law-keeping. It's about compassion and mercy.
But I say unto you that one greater than the temple is here. But if ye had known what this...
So Jesus claiming to be greater than the temple of God is an astounding claim that certainly would have offended the Jews and the Pharisees.
This meaneth, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, ye would not have condemned the guiltless.
I believe he's already said this a couple times in Matthew so far. And that comes from Hosea chapter 6, verse 6. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. And he's quoting it multiple times in Matthew already.
For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath.
Now, he calls himself the Son of Man. Sometimes it's confusing to me, why he would do that. Or if people would even understand that he's referring to himself. Or is he referring to the Son of Man in general, which could be all men. But he says, is Lord of the Sabbath. I think he's claiming that he is Lord of the Sabbath. Just like he said he's greater than the temple, he says he's Lord of the Sabbath, which also would have been offensive to the Pharisees and Jews.
And he departed thence and went into their synagogue. And behold, a man having a withered hand. And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath day? That they might accuse him.
So they intended to accuse him by his answer because they were absolutely certain that it was wrong to heal on the Sabbath day. So they assumed that he was going to say it's okay to heal on the Sabbath day. Therefore, they could accuse him of doing wrong by healing on the Sabbath day.
And he said unto them, What man shall there be of you that shall have one sheep, and if this fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out?
So Jesus is making the assumption, which is probably not an assumption on his part, that if they had a sheep that had fallen in to a pit, that they would get it out, that would be considered work for them to drag a sheep out of the pit, but yet they would decide to do it because it was their sheep. They had to save their sheep so that they could have their livelihood and offer their sacrifices. Jesus knew that they would do it, and he's pointing out their hypocrisy.
How much then is a man of more value than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath day. Then saith he to the man, Stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it forth, and it was restored whole as the other. But the Pharisees went out and took counsel against him, how they might destroy him.
So they got the answer that they expected, and they continued with the action that they intended to do, which was to accuse Jesus and try to destroy him. So anybody, when Jesus came along and he opposed their established traditions, that they felt they understood all the legalistic requirements, that a priest could perform his work duties, but yet no one else could do work duties. Maybe you don't call the priest's work duties work, but you do call plucking a head of grain work. They had made decisions on every detail of what they considered to be work or not, where the scriptures did not outline that detail. They made it up themselves. And I think that makes the point that the tradition of the mouth, which the Jews rely heavily on, is not law. That's not law. What's law is what is written, and then you have to be careful not to go beyond what is written and make extra laws or extra explanations about why this is good and why that is bad, when the law is very simple. I desire mercy and not sacrifice.
And Jesus, perceiving it, withdrew from thence, and many followed him, and he healed them all.
So again, Jesus is continuously healing multitudes of people. And again, Jesus perceiving their thoughts. Jesus knew everything they were thinking, what their motivations were, why they were doing what they were doing, before they even said it out loud. That is God's sovereignty. He can heal everybody, and he knows everybody's thoughts.
And charged them that they should not make him known, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken through Isaiah the prophet, saying, Behold, my servant whom I have...
And again, Jesus is telling them not to tell anybody about how he healed them. And he's already done that so far in Matthew. But his reputation was already so widespread, it's just ridiculous. So I don't understand why he says don't tell anybody. But here is a prophecy reference.
Have chosen, my beloved in whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he shall declare judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not strive nor cry aloud, neither shall any one hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed shall he not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory. And in his name shall the Gentiles hope.
So Jesus was always guaranteed victory. It was not a mistake that he died on the cross. He did not have to change his plan when things didn't go the way he expected it to go. It went exactly the way he wanted it to go because he was sovereign over the will of man and the plans of man and the circumstances that he was faced with. And in his name shall the Gentiles hope. So this prophecy says that he would declare judgment on the Gentiles, and that in his name shall the Gentiles hope. I find that interesting.
Then was brought unto him one possessed with a demon, blind and dumb, and he healed him, insomuch that the dumb man spake and saw. And all the multitudes were amazed and said, Can this be the son of David?
So again, he healed a man in front of multitudes of people. They saw it, they recognized it, they were amazed, and they even recognized that they were waiting for a Messiah who was the son of David. And they wondered if Jesus was their Messiah.
But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, "This man doth not cast out demons, but by Beelzebub, the prince of the demons." And knowing their thoughts, he said unto them, "Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to..."
Again, Jesus knew their thoughts. They didn't have to say it out loud. Jesus knew what they were thinking and what they were whispering to each other.
To desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan casteth out Satan, he is divided against himself. How then shall his kingdom stand? And if I by Beelzebub cast out demons, by whom do your sons cast them out?
So that's an interesting comparison. If they want to accuse Jesus of casting out demons by Satan's authority, then if they claim to be able to cast out demons, Jesus says, well, who are you casting out demons by the authority of? Or where did you get authority to cast out demons? So they certainly would assume that their authority came from God, but his authority came from Satan. If they were able to heal anybody, that was obviously the power of God, no matter who does it. If anyone can heal the sick, that's the power of God.
Therefore shall they be your judges. But if I by the Spirit of God cast out demons, then is the kingdom of God come upon you.
So he's been saying, prepare for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And he says, now if I'm doing these things by the Spirit of God, the kingdom of God has come upon you. So it's now even closer. It's like we may have reached into the coming of the kingdom already.
Or how can one enter into the house of the strong man and spoil its goods, except he first bind the strong man?
I think that strong man is Satan, and Jesus is the man who binds the strong man so that he can come down to earth and show his power over Satan.
And then he will spoil his house. He that is not with me is against me, and he that gathereth not with me scattereth. Therefore I say unto you, every sin and blasphemy shall be forgiven unto men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit shall not be forgiven.
So a lot of people like to discuss this verse. They call the unpardonable sin. Like every sin can be forgiven except for one, and that's blasphemy against the Spirit. And then everybody ponders what that is. And I would suggest that it's attributing the work of God to Satan. If you are calling God Satan, which is what they were doing, when he healed people, they said, oh, Satan did that. When it's obviously the work of God. Whenever you can heal sicknesses and cast out demons, that's the work of God. And when you attribute God's work to Satan, you are essentially blaspheming the Spirit. You are calling the Spirit of God the spirit of the demons. So that's why I'm happy to say that God is sovereign over all things. That if anything happens, God is the one responsible for it. For all the good things and even for all the things that I consider not good. If someone is sick or injured, you say, did God know about that, or did Satan overpower God? Did Satan afflict the person beyond what they could control or against their will or whatever? And I would say God is always aware of every situation and every circumstance down to the smallest detail. He knows everybody's thoughts in every way. And anything that happened falls under the sovereignty of God. That nothing can happen in opposition to God. Satan has no power over God whatsoever.
And whosoever shall speak a word against the Son of Man, it shall be forgiven him. But whosoever shall speak against the Holy Spirit, it shall not be forgiven him, neither in this world nor in that which is to come.
So I like this verse to plainly tell us that there is a world that we're in now, which specifically this would be when Jesus spoke in the first century. You would say, in this world, nor in the one which is to come. So there was going to be another world after the first century when he said it. And I think it's also still after the current world that we live in now. I think this world would be life on earth. And the one to come would be whenever we die and leave earth and go to the spiritual realm. And that would be the world that is to come.
Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree corrupt and its fruit corrupt. for the tree is known by its fruit. Ye offspring of vipers, how can ye, being evil, speak good things?
So here, he could just be talking to the Pharisees, or it could be just a general truth of all man. Really, we're living under the curse of Adam, that we are evil. How can you, being evil, speak good things?
For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. The good man out of his good treasure bringeth forth good things, and the evil man out of his evil treasure bringeth forth evil things.
So I would say that we all have evil, selfish desires. That's natural within us. And the good man is the one whom God has blessed and softened their heart and instilled them with wisdom and knowledge and understanding and the desire to do good. So I would give God credit for anything good that I would do and say that God is doing it through me, because my natural tendencies would be evil and sinful and selfish.
And I say unto you, that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. Then certain of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we would see a sign from thee. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign.
So everybody wants to see a sign, but he has already healed so many people and cast out so many demons in front of multitudes of people, and yet they still want to see another sign.
And there shall no sign be given to it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth.
So that's Jesus prophesying of his own death and burial in the tomb and resurrection. And probably no one understood what that meant at that time. We can look back and know what he's talking about. But when he said it, the disciples certainly would not understand what he was talking about. They were thinking of he may have just been in a pit for 3 days, not dead.
The men of Nineveh shall stand up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, a greater than Jonah is here. The queen of...
So, Jesus claiming to be greater than Jonah.
The queen of the south shall rise up in the judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, a greater than Solomon is here.
Jesus claiming to be greater than the king of Israel, the son of David.
But the unclean spirit, when he is gone out of the man, passeth through waterless places, seeking rest, and findeth it not. Then he saith, I will return into my house whence I came out. When he is come, he findeth it empty, swept, and garnished. Then goeth he, and taketh with himself 7 other spirits more evil than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man becometh worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this evil generation.
So, this generation being the first century, the Pharisees most likely, who were going to reject and kill their own Messiah in Jesus Christ. Just pointing out how corrupt and evil they are.
While he was yet speaking to the multitudes, behold, his mother and his brethren stood without, seeking to speak to him. And one said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, seeking to speak to thee. But
I think standing without is just talking about outside the house or something like that. They were standing outside.
But he answered and said unto him that told him, Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand towards his disciples, and said, Behold, my mother and my brethren. For whosoever shall do the will of my Father who is in heaven, he is my brother and sister and mother.
So I've said this before, but whosoever shall do the will of my Father, I don't think any human can claim credit for doing the will of God without God's influence and direction and guidance. If anybody does the will of God, it would be God who affects their will and actions. I believe it's Philippians 2:13, if you want to look that up. That God is the one who does good things in us. God is working in us, and His Spirit is moving through us to do the things that are in accordance with His will. So if anybody, if God is moving and directing and guiding anybody to do the will of the Father, then Jesus says, that is my brother, sister, and mother.